Interesting, change is about the only constant. Heraclitus said that 2,500 years ago, that change is the only constant. So we're living our bit of change, but change has always been the case. We've just got to get used to it. And it's just happening faster in more areas to more people at the same time. So it's quite exciting. If you like change, it's terrific. If you don't, you're doomed. Number one is to think about, looking at the future, examining the trends, examining potential discontinuity is pretty important. If you look at this chart here, 71 remain of the Global Fortune 500 companies, so 429 have disappeared in 70 years since that was formed. And since 2010, we've lost 70%, between 2000 and 2010, we lost 70% of the Global 1,000 companies. So nobody's owed a future is the key message. A lot of firms act as if the future's reliable and they will exist in it, but the evidence says actually most people won't. And mostly, as Drucker says, it's because the underlying business model they were based upon has disappeared or morphed. And these companies are not normally stupid. They're normally on top of the trends before anybody else. They just can't change. And some companies would rather go bust than change. And there's plenty of evidence that says, changing the business model, changing to a new paradigm, doing things differently, employing new people, engaging with new partners, accepting new pricing points is almost impossible for most companies. They'd rather go bust. So there we are, that's the world of change. If we look at technology for a minute, we're also not very good at sort of understanding the true implications of technology. By the way, I speak this fast because there's a lot to go through, so I'm sorry about that. If you can't listen that fast, we're in a bit of trouble. But the bottom line is data processing was a fad that wouldn't last the year, according to commentators and the editor of business in Prentice Hall in the United States. So often we look at these trends and get it a bit wrong. And as you see at the bottom, there's a whole array of technology. And that just goes on and on and on and on and on in terms of using tech to process information. And of course, it's now at the core of so many business models and new entrants and upstarts in industries. So, okay, we got that one wrong perhaps a few years ago. The telephone is inherently of no use whatsoever to Western Union, who are the world's largest electronic communications company in telex all around the world, so it's a telegraph company. And as of that year, actually, they went into decline and disappeared. So even things like a telephone, I don't know about you, but a telephone seems vaguely important to our lives now. And of course, the telephone isn't a telephone anymore. It's a small computer in your pocket. So interesting in terms of what happens to tech. We don't really see it what it is. We don't really understand its implications. And we dismiss it very easily. And that happens quite a lot. So tin cans, also quite interesting in my world. I could use lots of examples. I'm using this one. Tin can was a technology that liberated ships, and in this case the Royal Navy and our exploration ships, to allow those crews to live better, healthier, longer, exploring the world, unfortunately then taking people with guns, shooting everybody when we arrived, and taking them over. Well, that's past history. We don't do that today. But the bottom line is tin cans were a major technology when they came out. So as an interesting opener for 10, question for Ted, so how long was it before we invented a tin can opener? The first patent, there's a website up here you can go to, The History of the Tin Can, which is reasonably sad, I would suspect, but nonetheless, if you want to go, you can look it up to see the provenance of this. How long was it? Was it 6 months? A year? Must be 2, surely. I don't know, how long do you think? 10 years, very good, 48 years. So the very first tin can opener was patented, it didn't look like that, that's just prettier, 48 years after we invented tin cans. So we went round with ships with tin cans we couldn't open for 48 years. Or did we just do what we always done? We took out our dagger or our knife or our axe or our sword and chopped the lid off. Because that's what you did in those days. You used the current technology to interact with the new technology. And I can assure you, we are doing exactly the same today with new technology. We are doing old things using new technology. And so first we do things differently, then we do different things. And that sort of, if you're going to leapfrog that and understand the true implications of a technology and what you need to do to adapt to it, you've actually got one step ahead of your competition, if that matters. I don't know if anybody cares about competition. Does that matter? Or are we all in public service? I don't know. But if you're interested in competition, then you know that story about outrunning the bear? You haven't got to outrun the bear. You've got to outrun the next person next to you. So all you've got to do is look ahead slightly. The other person gets eaten, you don't. So the bottom line is looking ahead is quite productive. I hope that's what I've tried to establish. What's changing? Lots. These are the major trends, if you like to group them together, what's happening in the world and technology and the environment and how that's changing and impacting us. Changes at work, I'm going to dwell on a little bit today, demographics, people, aging, young cohorts, etc. and our patterns of consumption and behavior. All of that's changing at least, and plenty more, quite frankly. So let's talk about work for a while. Of course, globalization, who's available for work, changes everything. Technology, we're going to talk about some more. Demographics, I've discussed. Carbon economy, and what that means about how we do work and how we move ourselves around and how we engage with each other is hugely important. And of course, social change in terms of work-life balance, and I hate to use that very outdated term, but nonetheless, we're still seeking to strive to get that right in so many cases. So that's shaping generally the world of work. But what I love the fact is for many, many organizations, it's turning the lens around. Instead of us doing what we do, piling it high, selling it cheap, pushing it out there, it's actually turning the lens around to the consumer, the customer, and saying what's their world, what's their existence, what's their requirement, how do we meet that, how do I partner with others to provide a solution for my customers. Completely different paradigm. And that's reshaping many industries, many organizations to think differently about how they present themselves, how they offer what they do, and of course the people that deliver those types of services and that approach are very different from, if you like, people who sell product or standardized services. So we have a really interesting paradigm going on in many industries. When you turn around to consumerize what you're doing, it's very uncomfortable, it's very messy, but actually ultimately it can be very productive for you as an organization, very profitable if you can master the skills to do it. So huge change in many industries. Of course, work itself is changing in terms of how do we find people with the skills and the knowledge to bring to us, to add to what we're already doing to offer a complete solution. As we don't own many of the people, how do we gauge what they do? It's not coming in, having coffee, chatting by the coffee machine. It's very unproductive. We don't want that. We want people who are productive all the time and engage them on the requirement to do pieces of work, and what they do with the rest of their time is up to them. We're using different devices to connect to each other. Multiple generations have very different views for technology, as you already know, probably. Some of us are slightly challenged by technology. Some of us love it to pieces. But if you challenge the younger workforce, which I do, talk to PhDs, I speak on executive MBAs. They're not very young. They're about 25, 30 normally. But PhDs and people at universities and technical universities around the world, what I find is people are as wedded to their current technology as older people are wedded to theirs. So we are very inflexible in terms of thinking about the tools we use. We always want to hang on to the ones we really learn to become masters of. And then when we present something else, we're in shock for a little while. And of course, employees were asking to be innovative. And it's always been the case, to be honest. But now those employees probably belong to another company or a small company. And as I've said at the bottom here, Gen Y make up the worldwide workforce by majority over these next few years. So quite a dramatic shift, if you like, and challenges for us in work. If you ask millennials, very often in terms of what work life they want to have, one of the options in there is an independence. It's the ability to design more the way they work, and this changes depending you're in recession or not in recession, and this has moved in and out of vogue as we've had recession, or the Great Recession, I think we like to call it, and now we're moving out of that. We're getting back to this mindset again that says I want to build in some independence in the way that I build my career. And we're moving to the atomic economy, the networked economy, where it's not so much who I work for, but who I work with. And that sort of vernacular change is very subtle, but it means that how we assess who we are as an organization to present to the market is about our network, not about people we feel that we have within the wall so much. And I'll cover that in a bit more. It's outside of our organization I've been mentioning is where the power is. It's what we do internally is vital, but how we network with people to bring added skills and innovation and creativity and knowledge and wisdom and capacity to us is the new important element for all organizations. What's lovely is the future you can think of is networks of skilled people competing with networks of other skilled people. So you can see that's been true in procurement for years. It's now true in the workforce, if you like, and it's becoming true in many, many areas. That what we do at the center is all about our core skills and our brand and our market positioning, et cetera, and our capacity and so many other things come from outside the organization. Things like Yammer, for example, I'm sure we all use something like that to chat with each other and to manage our worlds and to share information. So what's interesting about all that, of course, is that automation is gradually coming in so many different ways, making knowledge workers, people who think and use their skills and their intellectual property, either that of the organization or their own individual, are increasingly being automated and becoming more productive, challenging those who perhaps aren't quite so effective to find work. And that's a trend that's going to move forward. And that doesn't mean to say there's going to be lots of unemployed people. It means we're going to reorganize the way we do things. And that's usually the outcome. We reorganize the way we do things. We don't do things in the normal way. And the nice thing is that if we want to get on in life, we've just got to get used to tech. Who loves technology? Show of hands, everyone's lying. They all say yes. No, of course we love technology. It makes us incredibly productive. It allows us to be spontaneous, to find people, to find information. Of course we love tech. And increasingly, whatever we do, we're going to just get used to using technology. What's quite interesting, still if you go to the senior levels of organizations, they still think it's pretty cool to claim they can't do an email. And even in this day and age, I find that staggering, quite frankly, because we have to be on top of the next technology and the one after that if we're in any sort of strategic role in our organizations to see what's coming and see the implications for our own organization. So let's look at mobile for a minute. In terms of mobile workers, I've talked about networked people, people inventing their own jobs, SMEs forming. About a billion people, 1,300,000,000 people will be working in mobile work styles in the future. And that's no great surprise, but we're enabling them by spending $1 billion a few years ago to 5 billion. So 500% increase in the amount of technology that we've provided to mobile workforce to be productive, opening up the gateways from our corporate information systems, connecting with our clients, understanding how that whole bubble of mobile work works. Of course, the consumerization of IT, which is a really interesting term, broadly speaking, I suppose irrelevant. What it really means is that you've got better technology than the company gives you. And that's happened in an awful lot of organizations. Smaller ones perhaps can be more agile, but some of the larger companies with an awful lot of security and rollout issues, people are bringing kit to work to make them more productive, that they're comfortable using, that isn't the corporate standard, and that's seriously challenging firms. Some still don't allow people to bring smartphones to work. They're asked to leave them at home. Some organizations, by regulation, are not allowed to bring phones to work that have cameras. Some organizations don't give people any access to tablets. Some people don't give any access to the internet. All those things are wrong. And there isn't time to discuss it, but even studies in Australia have proved that people who have access to the internet and are trusted to use that internet access wisely, even talking to their friends, tend to be more productive, about 9% in a study in Australia recently. And what that really means is that stop distinguishing between the boomers and Gen X, the digital natives versus the boomer generation. The boomers use the telephone to chat away for hours, arranging their holidays and talking to their partner and arranging for the car to be serviced. And the kids aren't allowed to use the internet to chat to their friends. Barking mad. Makes no sense whatsoever. Endlessly challenging the regulator on that. Makes no sense. Give up all technology if that's your attitude. We've got to allow people to use the new tools that make them content and happy and productive and want to stay in your company. Now let's start talking about technology, because I've just been talking about technology, but let's talk about tech. Number one, it's all about innovation and productivity. These two quotes up here are really summarized. It's all about innovation, doing things differently for some advantage that you're seeking, whatever that happens to be. And the second one is being more productive. The West needs to become more productive to compete with low-cost economies and emerging markets, and therefore tools and technology are one of the ways that we've always done it, and we always will do it for the foreseeable future. So innovation and productivity are the two key drivers. We're doubling roughly the number of people online in just the next few years, literally doubling. And that's dramatically going to change who they are and where they are and what their aspiration is and what culture they're from and what they're trying to achieve, and are they buying, are they selling, are they learning? And of course with the Khan Institute, which you'll all know about, originally video, now online, helping to educate people all around the world to equalize the way the world works. We've got some really interesting dynamics going on. And with stratospheric satellites just being launched or about to be launched, which are robotic aeroplanes that fly in the stratosphere and can stay up for 5 years at a time and are piloted from the rays of the sun, and they act as satellites producing mobile network communication, we can massively cover the world in communications where otherwise it would take years putting up geostationary satellites into full orbit. So very different access to technology. Social, we've all got used to. We all use social, we all chat away on it. Who uses social media? Brilliant. Don't need to tell you what it is. What we're using it for right now, of course, is an awful lot of chit-chat. Some of it's working and some of it's not working in terms of inside organizations. Some of it's for learning. Some of it's for accessing other people. Some of it's for building community. Some of it's for marketing. There's a whole bunch of reasons. There are 12 categories of social networks, as you know. Outside of those 12 categories, there's hundreds of iterations of social tools that do different things depending if you're curating or you're sourcing or whatever you're doing. But what I love to think about social is it's another tech that's changing what we do. And it was the one behind, if you like, the Arab Spring that allowed people to collaborate with each other. Tiananmen Square was driven by the telex and the facsimile machine. The Arab Spring, by communication, was broadly speaking around social, that people communicate very rapidly, and the governments no longer had control, and it's changing who we work with and how we work, and I've discussed that enough. But what it's really interesting, it should be changing management processes. It should be changing how we collaborate around problems inside businesses. And what's interesting about that is then you're into the boomer territory. You're into older Gen X and boomer territory, and you can frighten them stupid if you say you should be switching off email and only using social. Try it. You'll get another job quickly enough. The point is that when you persuade people that this is the way ahead, and they've got over the relearning of the skill, which is the frightening bit, I was competent and I'm consciously incompetent. If I go through that cycle with social, and I'm told to collaborate around management issues online with groups at different situations, then I feel threatened. Those core skills I've built up are no longer productive for me, and I'm unproductive for a while. But nonetheless, once you can get people, and I've got one of the largest companies in Britain, the top executive team, 40 of them, now using social tools to manage their business. It's one of the largest in the UK. It's a regulated economy, and after a day together, they worked out the only way they could get done what they needed to get done in time was actually to use social tools. The other thing that's quite fun is, as those devices disappear, we go through a stage of holographics, and we will have increasingly things like avatars that will leap out from screens, and by the way, we won't have screens either, so they disappear as well, because we haven't got enough indium in the world that we make them out of. So increasingly we'll have virtualized holograms who will interact with us in a very human way, and all technology that is a more human-like engagement is successful. If you look at all of the tools that we ever take up, the more human-like it is. If it's hand gesture, voice-driven, eye movement, we like to interact in a human being-like way. So we'll probably have avatars that we're happy to chat to for hours and hours on end. The average avatar, by the way, has an environmental footprint of a person living in Brazil, because there's a whole bunch of technology behind it, server farms and technology. So they're not free environmentally, but they are an interesting alternate to human beings. It's part of our automation. So 3D virtuality, embedded glasses, of course, all these things I've talked about. Ultimately, we'll link our minds together. Do we believe that? So we'll connect our heads together and communicate with each other and transmit knowledge. Probably many of you know that Oculus, which is this device which you strap on and you're in a 3D world and you're in it. You're not looking at it, you're in it. And that's the subtle difference. If you play massively online reality games, who plays massively online reality games? One or two? Okay. Well, some of them are places where you go in and shoot everybody. And that's fine. Or not. World of Warcraft are one of the originals in that sort of world, and all sorts of stuff. But they're getting incredibly realistic. Some of the technology inside driving the animation and the graphics is just extraordinary. And when you look at it, it's bad enough. And bad is obviously a judgmental term. If it's a military thing, it seems a bit violent. But if you go in it, in virtual tools, it's staggering. And the emotions that you can experience are quite extraordinary. I first experienced one of these headsets in 1982 in Dr. Stone's lab at Salford University. And we had a glove to move things, and we were moving walls and buildings around, and moving shelf heights, and doing all sorts of things, and flying using virtual reality. Unbelievable. It's taken 30 years to get to anything close to rapid take-up. So Oculus was bought by Facebook for $2.1 billion in the summer, and it's likely to get monetized and exploited and developed now. And it will change our interactions with people because we can physically be together. We will feel we are physically together in virtual worlds. I went to an event about, 5 years ago in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, and I was charged with explaining how virtuality would impact the banking and insurance industry. Thank you very much. So, gave that a go, failed miserably, couldn't persuade anybody that it mattered at all. People started a debate. Well, the idea was to have a debate, actually. So we had a debate, and no one was winning. And so one guy from a well-known building society stood up and said, look, I'll give you an example of why this works. He said, my sister lives in Canada, I live in the United Kingdom, and we telephoned each other occasionally. Great. He said, then we have texting, and now we very casually text each other occasionally. And it was great. He said, we now go for a walk together in Second Life. It's personal, it's human, it's connected, it's real. It's experiential. It's really going to be terrific when we get to do that on a regular basis. So I can be anywhere at any time in the day, in different places, in a leisure situation, in a working situation. Terrific, very exciting. In the future, we'll control technology using our minds, as I mentioned before, and that's already working. We've now got people flying aeroplanes by their thought. I'm not sure I want to be in one yet. Unfortunately, they're not airlines, but people are working how to drive things like aeroplanes, just thinking about what you want to do. And that's pretty cool. As I mentioned before, we will, in the next 10 years, be increasingly sharing knowledge, head to head, brain to brain. It's not completely science fiction. It already has some degree of scientific basis to that happening. And why wouldn't we? As I mentioned before, we'll have humanoid-type iterations of it. This guy here is a hologram. You can tell that because he hasn't got any feet. But he was in Switzerland, he was in New York, and they ran a conference together. So you can be in multiple places. And if you think about music bands, bands don't make any money from their music really anymore. People buying tracks. It's not really that profitable. Concerts and monetization of that concerts is hugely profitable. So if you can have a band in 15 cities at the same time, some are physical, some are holograms, you're going to be able to monetize situations. If you make them very real, we're going to have whole new ways of entertaining ourselves and monetizing ourselves and being productive. So as I said earlier on, I just mentioned, with any of these technologies and approaches, first we do things differently, and then we do completely different things. So the trick is to think about any one of these things that may be bumping up against the way you do things. Say, is that a clue to actually maybe how we need to change what we do, or is it just making what we do more productive or innovative? So we have to think about what do these technologies mean, what do these new business models mean? So thank you very much.